Let me start by saying that as a special rapporteur, and especially after having been here, including for the previous debate, I feel compelled to stress how impartiality is relevant to the work of human rights mechanisms, myself, the Commission of Inquiry, and others. Impartiality requires acknowledging the fundamental asymmetry in power, resources, and intent between Israel and Palestine's action, and it cannot be invoked while blatantly ignoring the reality. And the horrible reality under our eyes is a consequence of it, and the reality of the international community ignoring it, failing to correct it. This year only, 22 Israelis and 183 Palestinians have been killed, and this sits on the shoulders of the occupying power, who refuses to withdraw its troops and to withdraw its colonial presence from the occupied Palestinian territory, over which, it's worth remembering, it has no sovereignty. The government of Israel regrettably declines requests to meet, to respond to issues of concerns, and to allow us, human rights mechanism, to visit the territory, over which, once again, it has no sovereignty. This violates fundamental obligations of a member state as laid out in the UN Charter. And while it refuses to engage in constructive dialogue and repeatedly violates its obligations, Israel also engages in vilification of human rights mechanisms by attacking them with spurious allegations of anti-Semitism and bias. And I'm very disconcerted by hearing how many in this room didn't take the time to address one substantive issue of the reports of the Commission of Inquiry, while accusing it of bias and anti-Semitism. This is something that pertains to you and to the way you address your work, but I find it very problematic. The Human Rights Council, from which my mandate and the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry originates, which, by the way, is made of the same states who are here, has a mission to advance human rights over and above and notwithstanding politics. The focus of the Human Rights Council on the situation in Israel-Palestine is high. This is a fact, but this is a symptom of the UN failure to resolve a political question marked by profound imbalance and injustice in line with international law. And this is due to the paralysis of the UN Security Council. So let's invert the pyramid and then let's discuss it. And again, instead of engaging on these issues, I see that Israel loudly attempts to divert attention from the reality on the ground. I would like to use the time at my disposal to elaborate on some of the questions that were asked in the interest of time. I think that the report is quite clear on what is to be done. Please abide by the law. The law is crystal clear. This is not a situation where the special rapporteur is called upon setting the standards. The law is clear and is closer to power than to justice. And this is the result of a political setting. The other thing, the reality is fully documented. And again, we cannot push this false equivalence between the parties. One is the occupier and the other is the occupied. One is the colonizer and the other is the colonized. So what is needed to provoke this paradigm shift? Call spade a spade. This is a settler colonial occupation. It amounts to the crime of aggression, and it cannot be defended on the ground of self-defense. An occupier, a colonizer doesn't have the right of self-defense. Now, I criticize in my report the three main approaches that I see the international community using vis-à-vis the question of Israel-Palestine. First, and I hear it here, one is the political approach, which is considering negotiation as the mantra that will materialize by itself, on its own. In order to have negotiations, you need to create the conditions. How you expect, those of you who have undergone colonization, have you been forced to negotiate the conditions of your liberations with your colonizers? No. And so why is this being asked to the Palestinians? And so self-determination should be realized first and as a precondition in order to then see what is the negotiation that is to occur between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Second, a discussion that has taken place in recent years is the engagement to promote prosperity through development and economic growth. But how can growth and how can economic development mean anything to people who are deprived of their fundamental rights, who cannot take their kids to school safely, who cannot access a civil court in 55 years? Please ask the State of Israel, because I cannot do that myself, why it's displacing 1,200 Palestinians from Masafer Yatta, who are seeing, as I speak, their houses bulldozed, in order to have a firing zone? A firing zone. Israel has the right to train its soldiers in its own metropolitan territory, not in the territory over which it doesn't have sovereignty. So you see, it's all these distortions what pushed me to ask you to be honest, not to, to move away from this cognitive dissonance where you see the reality on the ground, but then you cannot stick to what is needed, application of international law. The UN Charter is clear. You don't need other human rights bodies telling you that. There are economic, political, diplomatic measures that are there to be taken. And you can consider doing that as an individual state, a regional state, pending the paralysis of the UN Security Council. And I also have another word of criticism for what I call humanitarianism, the way the question of Palestine over time, and not out of good intentions, I'm sure, has been transformed again from a political situation to resolve in line with international law into a permanent humanitarian crisis to manage. Humanitarian aid might be necessary, but is never a substitute for political solution and will. And so as a human rights lawyer, I can only say, international law is as valid as the will of states to enforce it. And I'm even 2 minutes and 20 seconds, so I have some other questions. So I called for a protective, yes, in the report I called for a protective presence. And it's not my idea, in fact. It has been proposed by the Secretary General in the case of the occupied Palestinian territory for more than 50 years, in fact. And I understand a protective presence must be authorized by the UN Security Council, but I think that there is also diplomacy that allows you to discuss with Israel how to allow a coalition of states to have an intermediary, a buffer between the colonists, the settlers who go around attacking the civilians and terrorizing them, the soldiers and the Palestinians. The challenges I face are many, but nothing compares to what the people on the ground face, primarily the Palestinians, but also the Israelis, because no one can dehumanize another people and not be dehumanized in turn. And no one can deliver the occupation in the violent way it is delivered without being corrupted, him or herself. So I'm profoundly disheartened by the current situation. And concerning accountability, if the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh, who's probably was the most renowned journalist and even an American citizen, and there have been investigations, it's clear who killed her, if even these cannot lead to accountability, do you understand the despair that is leading Palestinians to take the streets these days and to re-embrace armed struggles? And I would stop here. Thank you.